Okay, thank you, Jim. As I related in one of my earlier recollections, the laboratory of Dr. Hans Gruber was hidden beneath a brothel, but it was not very well hidden. In the inevitable way that nature has of bleeding over the edges, of coloring outside the lines whenever it chooses to do so, Madame Goethe, who, as you can tell by her title, was the madam of that establishment, began toying with sophisticated German technology nearly beyond her control. This technology seemed to creep up from beneath the floorboards and bleed over into the day-to-day life of Madame Goethe's bordello, though the bordello itself was just a front for the underground lab. I say nearly. It is a precise choice of words. Once Madame Goethe got her hands around something, she never let go. She would work it, milk it for what it was worth. She was a true professional in that regard. And so it was that among the many discoveries we made in that brothel, we learned that the Germans had figured out a way to control gravity. In their typically German way, they did not stop there. No, how could they? In the basement, we found a pair of electromagnets, each the size of an ordinary brick, suspended in midair, caught in an endless embrace and spinning at incredible speed. Madame Goethe was using this pair of spinning electrical magnets as a perpetual motion machine whose counter-rotating field was captured by cesium plates aligned vertically. You may ask, what for? Well, I am going to tell you. One has a precise sense of the limits of technology when one understands that Madame Goethe, limited by the type of wiring and filaments in her day, was limited in the way she was able to stream this unthinkable energy into the bodies of her prostitutes, which had always been her intention. Using ordinary 12-grade copper wire from the 1930s era, Madame Goethe wired up Johns and hookers, hookers and Johns at the back of the head. The result was a failure. The men maintained an erection until their testicles began to rotate. Depending on which side of the house he was on, they would rotate clockwise or anti-clockwise. When a man would ejaculate, the exiting semen would catch the gland's cap on fire, resulting in immense pain and some irritation. The women's breasts would levitate and ignite, sometimes separating from their bodies altogether and shooting off into orbit. Still, this German bordello madam persisted, yet she failed for lack of a good piece of wire. We had a sailor in our division named Chris Benoit, not like the Chris Benoit who was in the news recently. This one murdered his family. Private Benoit had a Dutch wife who used to follow us with a cart dragged by oxen. Private Benoit would retreat to the safety and loving comfort of the ox cart every night after dark. And so it was that 9 months into our assault on Stalingrad, Mrs. Benoit gave birth to a baby boy. The baby boy at first glance was healthy, but that glance quickly soured into a more realistic view. The baby had a strange and misshapen head, Small, beady eyes looked out and gave us a sense that this was a baby which was neither happy nor sad, but simply angry. One day, a squirrel happened by the crib which was located inside the ox cart. Baby Benoit leapt from the crib and, performing a 180-degree flip maneuver, slammed the crying squirrel onto its back. This caused great alarm among his parents. It came to pass one day that Private Benoit was found wandering the camp. He was listless and confused. When asked where he had been for the last 3 days, since neither hide nor hair of him had been seen for that long, Private Benoit simply asked for some barbed wire. This request he repeated without fail for the next several hours. No matter what the question, no matter what the attempt to entreaty him into conversation, Benoit would only repeat his request for barbed wire, and, finding none, wander off into the next group to ask again. It turned out that Benoit's baby had been muttering French oaths in the days prior to Private Benoit's disappearance. Now, the Benoits were deeply religious. When baby Benoit started to curse in French, before even saying mommy or daddy, the Benoits were convinced it was religious possession. So, Daddy Benoit did the best thing he could for his son. He wrapped his son in barbed wire, finally finding some at the edge of camp, and tossed him into the river. When the baby boy sunk beneath the murky waves, a spell was lifted from Daddy Benoit. Cursing and weeping, he detailed that he had been possessed by the spirit of Tommy Johnson, a homeless black man from Philadelphia. Moreover, that the curses in French had been him using ventriloquism. He wanted to know where his baby boy was, what had happened to him. We explained that he had wrapped the baby in barbed wire and tossed him into the river, and that we were loath to intervene because it was a family matter. Private Benoit hung himself from a nearby tree after smothering his wife with a handful of hay. In one of those peculiar ironies of life, it turned out that baby Benoit survived. He slipped out of his skin long enough to escape the barbed wire, then wrestled the river to the ground until it turned into a dry creek bed. There he lived off blueberries and the dew of the grass until he was a strong, grown man. But destiny runs in families, just as the clap does, and you may be sure that behind the recent tragedy was the grinning face of the Philadelphia black man, Tommy Johnson. Toodaloo.